Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this week's Soccer Strong Resilience. Our topic this week is learning to forgive. So if anyone has ever been wronged by anyone else or done wrong to someone else, which I think is pretty much everyone, then this is the module for you. In learning to forgive, it's not just about learning to forgive others. It's also about learning to forgive ourselves. And one of your materials this week is an excellent TED Talk, and there's the YouTube link on Blackboard on self-compassion and self-esteem. And I think one of the main things that really resonated with me in watching that was the concept of self-compassion being tied to that forgiveness of self, and how even if we are generally positive people and have a positive mind frame about things, that we are still our own worst enemies when it comes to self-criticism, and that we self-talk more negatively than we do to others. So we would say things that are about ourselves or to ourselves that are more negative than anything we would say to a friend or loved one, or even a stranger or someone we even don't like sometimes. And so these are things like saying really small ones like, oh, I'm so stupid, I messed that up, or oh, I am the worst, I can't believe I was late again. And they may seem small or something to dismiss or something you just say in passing, but over time, what research shows is that the more you say those little things to yourself, the more impact they tend to have, because it's a cumulative effect. So reframing the things we say into positive self-talk, even if it's about something that happened that we weren't okay with or that wasn't a desired outcome, is a big part of that. So when we talk about reframing things, it's taking a negative statement that you say, maybe like, oh, I'm so stupid, or oh, I'm the worst, and reframing it in a positive way. And it works a lot better if you have something specific. So, oh, I'm the worst, I'm always late to everything, is the positive reframe on that is, I know I can do better with my time management and learn to be on time. So you're not beating yourself up, you're not tearing yourself down, you're acknowledging that there is something that needs to change, and that you are the one that needs to change it, and that you have the ability to do that. So it's not sugarcoating things, it's not ignoring your flaws or areas that you need to improve. It's not saying, oh, it's okay, without any intention of change, right? It is purposeful, it's direct, and it is a catalyst for you to actually take action to do something. And that's the importance about reframing things. And we kind of talked about this a little bit when we talked about toxic positivity. And instead of saying things like, well, it could be worse, which is not helpful to someone, instead saying something more helpful, like, I know this is a hard time and I'm here for you. Sticks to the facts, but doesn't hold any judgment or connotation to it, right? Learning to forgive ourselves for small things is hard, and for big things it's even harder. And people who say that they don't hold grudges or that they forgive easily tend to hold grudges against themselves or beat themselves up for things for years, much longer than they would if it was anyone else. And some people even relive that mistake every time a similar situation comes up, which can cause anxiety. It can cause a sense of defeatism, like being defeated, that, well, oh yeah, I really messed this up big last time, I might as well not even try, or I know I'm going to mess it up this time, so it just is what it is. And those bigger things that tend to hit us harder are the things that we have to be very, very intentional about addressing, even more so than those little things that build up and have that cumulative effect. So for those big things, I mean, it's almost daily reminders that, yes, I made a big mistake. Yes, that's going to be an issue for a while. And I am going to do better next time so that this doesn't happen again. It doesn't have to be overwhelmingly or 100% positive. You can acknowledge the fact that you may make a mistake next time, but at least it won't be the same mistake, or it won't be as serious a mistake because you're learning, right? Because you tried to do better, because you tried to go back and fix it. And at the end of the day, I think the biggest thing in self-forgiveness that we can all tell ourselves every day is, I'm only human and I'm only one person. And no one can do it all. And no one should try to do it all because you'll burn out and it's not healthy. And you're only human. Any of us are only human. We cannot do all the things. We cannot take care of all the people. We cannot solve all the problems, no matter how much we want to. And no matter how good we are at something that might be considered an area of expertise for us, we're not infallible. We're still going to make mistakes because we're only human. And that's okay. The only thing that I think would not fall into any of that is if anyone intentionally makes a mistake, maybe for a reason of revenge, or for it's a self-serving behavior because they can get something out of it, or as a manipulation tactic. Like, those things are not okay. You made an active choice to do those things. But honest mistakes, missteps, being forgetful, things that like that, you're only human. So huge. That also carries over into forgiveness for others, right? Because if we're only human and everyone is only human, then the people we need to forgive are only human. And learning to forgive others is pretty tricky in the sense of maintaining appropriate boundaries, right? Because forgiveness does not mean giving someone a free pass to hurt you or do wrong by you again, right? It means that you've taken stock of yourself, of the situation, of how it affected you, and you have decided that you can forgive that person and move on and move forward and not hold a grudge and not hold it over them. That doesn't mean that everything's okay. And that's a really important distinction, I think, that gets lost for people is, well, if I forgive them, then they're going to think that everything's fine and that, they can get away with something else in the future. And that's not what it is at all. And so I said that, we're going to talk about boundaries, especially as this goes on. So this is another boundary, is setting a limit of forgiveness does not equal all those other things. And boundaries in terms of saying no to things like being hurt or manipulated or taken advantage of, those things, setting those limits of saying no to someone else is saying yes to yourself. And that's the important thing to remember about boundaries, is they're not selfish, they're not rude. They are there to protect you and keep you healthy. So in learning to forgive, your forgiveness isn't contingent on somebody respecting that boundary, but your future interactions might be. Meaning, I can forgive you, but I'm never going to lend you money again. That's the boundary, because you never pay me back. So we can be friends, we can hang out, we can have a good time, we can put this behind us, but don't ask me to lend you money. That's not an option anymore. You'll have to ask somebody else for that kind of help. We tend to forgive either all at once or not at all. And forgiveness is usually not an all or nothing thing. It's a process, right? Especially when trust has been broken. That is something that takes time to repair and rebuild. And even if someone says, I forgive you, and the forgiveness is there, the trust part kind of makes that forgiveness incomplete. And it's not a bad thing. It's just that change happens over time, right? And we talk about this when we're talking about good habits versus bad habits and things like that. And in forgiving others, it shouldn't be conditional. It shouldn't be, well, I'll forgive you if. Forgiveness is not something that has conditions. You give it freely, right? And you give it because you want to and because you're ready to. And if you struggle with forgiving someone for something, that's okay. There are certain things that people individually themselves or collectively as a society deem unforgivable. And that's for you to decide for yourself if something is unforgivable. You don't have to go around forgiving everyone that has done you wrong. Some things are just too hurtful or too impactful, and we can't get there. And that's okay. That's our boundary, right? Figuring those things out for yourself that's your own struggle, your own process, right? And it really kind of comes down to, if I forgive, what are the pros and cons? If I don't forgive, what are the pros or cons, right? And can I live with forgiving that person, or can I live with not forgiving that person? It's very personal, and no one can make that decision but you. Other people can give you their input, certainly, if you invite it, if you ask for it, because unsolicited advice is a boundary breaker that we don't want to do, but we struggle with as humans because a lot of times we just want to help. But taking that kind of self-assessment when you're going to forgive someone, and no one says that forgiveness has to take any amount of time. Whether you forgive someone, the next minute, the next day, or whether it takes months or years, that's for you to decide. Don't tell someone that you forgive them, though, if you do not sincerely mean it, because then it's unfair to them, and it's unfair to yourself, because you're setting yourself up to fail for a standard of how you interact with them based on that forgiveness being true. And if it's not, you're not going to meet that standard. Eventually, something will happen that will trigger that grudge that you're holding onto, or that hurt that you're holding onto, and cause you to treat that person in a way that says, I didn't really forgive you. I just said I did. So be mindful of that. And you don't have to forgive someone just because they beg for it or because they ask for it. Again, it's personal. It's your choice to make. So this week's video is about 20 minutes long. So our session with me talking today is going to be a little bit shorter than typical. There are also 3 great articles that I've linked in the extras folder in the course section folder for module 8. And I'd really, really like you guys to check each of those out. They come from different sources, different kind of perspectives, but they all sort of say the same thing. And I think the first thing that caught my eye about the Psychology Today article is this definition of forgiveness that starts the article out, because I didn't really think about really what forgiveness means. Right? It's just something you do, right? When you're forgiving someone, when you're getting over a slight. But the Psychology Today definition that they gave to start out the article is that forgiveness is the release of resentment or anger. It doesn't mean reconciliation, and you don't have to return to the same relationship or accept the same harmful behaviors from that person. And it's vitally important for the mental health of those who have been victimized. So forgiveness is a big piece in self-care and self-healing, and even, of course, self-compassion, which the video does a far better job going into than I can. One of the distinguishing points from that video, though, was that self-compassion and self-esteem are not equal. They're not the same thing. And that you can have good self-esteem and think well of yourself and still not show yourself good self-compassion or any self-compassion at all. And we see this a lot of times in people who are highly successful and highly driven, but they're all work and no play, right? They don't give themselves leeway to be human. They don't give themselves leeway to make mistakes. And when it does happen, it's devastating. It hits them especially hard. And balance is so, so important. So that self-compassion to make a mistake, no matter how much you've achieved, no matter how much you've learned, no matter, what your status in your job or other group you may be a part of, you're still only human, right? You're still going to make mistakes, and you need to still be compassionate towards yourself for those things. This week's topic seems kind of, I don't know, like to the side or kind of off, I think, from some of the others in terms of what it has to do with resilience. But when we talk about self-healing and self-care, we know that those things are instrumental to resilience. If we can take care of ourselves, if we can heal ourselves, we are going to bounce back faster from setbacks than if we don't have that internal resource and that kind of internal structure of those boundaries that go along with forgiveness. And it's the same for forgiving other people too, is that having those boundaries of, when, why, how, where we forgive others, and that the forgiveness isn't conditional, but what happens afterwards is. Again, it doesn't mean reconciliation. It doesn't mean everything's, back to normal and we are closest friends again, right? It's not tied to that. So what happens after that and how you choose to proceed may or may not, but typically is a really tough decision, and it's a difficult thing to work through. And it's a challenge sometimes because we worry about the what ifs, we worry about hurting the other person. And that's where those boundaries really come into play, where just because we say no to someone else doesn't mean we're not saying yes to ourselves. And at the end of the day, we are not responsible for how someone else chooses to receive information that we share with them. We're not responsible for how someone else feels or chooses to react to that. That's a big emotional boundary that takes a lot of skill to develop, but it plays a huge part of resilience. Because if we don't set boundaries with those people and we forgive, and they say forgive and forget, and that's good to a certain degree, but you can't forgive and ignore, right? You can let go of a grudge in terms of the forgetting part, but don't ignore the effect that whatever you're forgiving had on you. Don't ignore that is going to inform your decisions and your interactions with this person going forwards. Don't ignore the warning signs of a similar situation happening again. Keeping those in mind helps you protect yourself, right? And helps you bounce back from disappointment in other people. And it's one of those things where we're not just with boundaries protecting ourselves from others, we're protecting ourselves from ourselves, because we will do things for other people with the best of intentions that are not healthy for ourselves, like overextending ourselves to help too much to the point where we have nothing left for ourselves, right? So one of those other things you have to decide about forgiveness is if you're having to forgive the same person multiple times, and maybe it's not for the exact same thing every time, but maybe it's things that are like under the same umbrella or category that all kind of relate to one another. Your decision for that is, how many times am I going to forgive them and continue to have a relationship with them or continue to engage with them? The more you forgive them and keep getting hurt, that's going to chip away at your resilience, because somewhere along the line, your self-compassion and self-worth are lacking in the area of the boundary that I deserve to be treated a certain way, and their behavior is not meeting that. It's not meeting that standard. It's not meeting that boundary. And where you go from there. So in terms of forgiveness as a whole, this week's assignments, worksheets are pretty personal in terms of the thinking that they have you do and the self-examination they have you do. So the first is to think about a time someone forgave you, and then there's several prompts from there, and to write about it. And then the second one is to write a letter to someone that you need to forgive or would like to forgive. And while the second one doesn't explicitly say to write anything about the letter you've written, there are some questions that follow the writing the letter, questions that are about the letter that's being written. And those are the questions that I would like to have you guys answer for question number 2. You don't have to include the letter at all. That's personal. And I don't need to know the ins and outs of that situation. I'm not asking you to share your forgiveness letter to someone else. I'm just asking for you to share your thought process or things that went into it, or your opinion in response to the questions that are asked in number 2. And I think that's actually it for this week. Pretty straightforward and, pretty clear cut. So your discussion post for this week will relate back to the articles and the TED Talk video. And then there may be a backup third one, or a third one for you guys to choose from, not a backup, that relates back to a certain thing we talked about in this video today. So as always, if you or a friend, classmate, roommate, just someone else on campus that you know, maybe just in passing or being part of the same type of group, is struggling with anything, because these are wild times and there's a lot going on right now for people to cope with, you can submit a care report, wichita.edu/care or wichita.edu/report it. On the report it link there, you gotta look specifically for the care team form, right? Because there's other report forms that you can fill out. So if you want us, care team is where just our form exists for itself. And we always ask that if you want to remain anonymous, that's awesome. We don't disclose who reported someone, unless you obviously reported for yourself, but who reported a concern, because sometimes that can be awkward in friendships or other types of relationships. So we don't disclose that regardless, unless you've already told the person yourself. We do appreciate you leaving a name or contact info, though. Even if you do wish to remain anonymous, we're not going to share that with anyone. We just want to be able to get in contact with you and let you know, hey, we were able to get a hold of the friend you were concerned about, or hey, we weren't able to get in contact with them, or I need an answer. I have a follow-up question. And that's really helpful for us to do our jobs appropriately. So thank you guys so much, and I will see you all next week, next Thursday.